Welcome to Security Weekly's Virtual Hacker Summer Camp 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment is good friend, Sandy Carielli. She is Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Sandy, welcome to Security Weekly.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here. How you doing?
Good. We haven't had you on in a while. I think the last time we were just talking about December on Application Security Weekly. We were talking about bots and bot management. We're going to talk about security champions today. And you've been doing some research here on what does it take to build a security champions program in your development team. So I really want to get into the discussion and what did you learn?
I got to tell you, this was some of the most fun research I've done. Just talking to the security leaders that are running these programs, they're so passionate about it. It was just great conversations. But there were so many interesting aspects of this. And, I'll start with what do we even mean by a developer security champion? Because I think there's a little bit of, question on the definition. A developer security champion is a developer first. So when we talk about these security champions, we're not talking about necessarily embedding security people on the dev team. We're talking about taking developers, people who are developers first and foremost, training them up in security and really having them be the local security resource for the dev team. And there are a couple of advantages of that. One, they're able to address a lot of the low-hanging fruit security issues right there more immediately. So you bring a lot of it to the source. Two, when there are bigger, higher level, more complicated security issues, the developer security champion knows who to talk to because they have the relationship with security. So you're bridging that gap. And the third thing is that you're scaling out the security team and you're sort of extending credibility, which because there's sort of this historical friction, it's a really nice way to bring security out to the dev team in a more organic type of manner. So that's the first part of this.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about on Application Security Weekly on Monday with Mike Rothman was some of the challenges of breaking down the silos between the security team and the development team, right? We still see a lot of separate application security teams, maybe not really embedded with the development teams. There still seems to be these silos. So how do you break those silos down to get to this developer security champion?
So one thing that stood out as a trend among a lot of the interviews that I had and a lot of the research that I did was the importance of hiring the right person to manage the program. You have the security champions, on the dev teams, but somebody has to manage and oversee the program, work with the champions, handle the training, work on any rewards and process and coordinate meetings and follow-ups and things like that. That person needs to have credibility with the developers and with the development managers. And there were a lot of trends around empathy, hiring people who used to be developers, so that there was a little bit of, hey, I used to be in your shoes. I know this is hard, but here's the value of it. So having someone go in with that. I spoke to one CISO who, when he hired a security architect to work with the dev teams, he involved the development managers in that interview process. So there was buy-in right from the get-go. And they were hiring someone that they knew understood them. So that's a really critical element there. Make sure the people managing these programs actually are empathetic towards developers, and ideally were developers themselves at one point.
Yeah, so you do recommend or see that the security teams are trying to head up, kind of be in the center of excellence. I think Mike used the term center of excellence for that, but it's coming out of the security team. And for some security teams, that person that has that empathy for developers may not exist. Remember, a lot of us came out of network, maybe endpoint or some other areas. We may not have development skill sets. I mean, my developer skill sets are way old from my master's degree, and I wouldn't be a good, probably empathetic person. I mean, I might be. Paul would be better than I would be, just because he's doing a lot more development these days. So do you recommend that if that resource doesn't exist in the security team, you need to go look for somebody? Yeah.
Hire it. I had one chief product security person tell me bluntly that he hires for empathy. That's what he looks for. That's his top qualification for these types of roles. You need that on the team. If you've got somebody managing this that doesn't have that empathy and good relationship with developers, how are you going to maintain the program? Because remember, the program isn't just, hey, let's find some devs and train them up in security and then go away. You need to get them on board. You probably have different levels of training. There are some programs that have like a belt system, green belt, brown belt, black belt. There are a lot of programs that have regular meetings among the different security champions in the organization where they can bounce ideas off of each other and raise issues. It's an ongoing process. So you need someone who's constantly going to be there and be empathetic and be coordinating that. If that person doesn't have credibility, that's your program.
Yeah. Now, are you seeing a trend of more kind of adoption towards these types of programs? Do you see the CISOs actively wanting to build out these programs, going out and hiring these people, or do we still have a pretty big gap in what the CISO sees as important or not?
It varies. I talked to a number of security teams that have these programs in place and are really excited about them. And I hear from others that really want to start them up, but they're not universal yet. There's still definitely ways to go to get that to the point it needs to be at. And it's not just developer security champions. My colleague, Janan Budge, covers security champions more broadly in the organization. And, it's the same thing. You need people that are empathetic to the roles that they're interacting with. So there is that ongoing process that needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Now, if you're going to start a program, you don't already have one in place. Yep. Outside of hiring somebody to manage the program and making sure you have that empathetic person to the developer team, how do you get started? How do you start the training programs? Because now what you're doing is you're taking developers that their primary job has been developing a set of features and getting them out, maybe building out the CI/CD pipeline. How do you start to inject and educate on the security front? What's working and what's not working?
So let's even go back before that. First thing you need to do is get executive buy-in and funding for the program. This needs to be something that has high-level exposure, that has a little bit of funding, even if not a lot. So this is a formal funded program. That's really important because you want to be able to, demonstrate results and have this as something that's going to be ongoing. So you need that buy-in from the beginning, and you need to be clear about what the goals are and make sure that there is visibility for the program. Once you have that, and then you have somebody who's managing the program, have a security architect, have multiple people, whatever you end up hiring, depending on the size of the org, then you actually have to find the champions. And I had some really interesting stories around this. There were some organizations that started by perhaps asking the development managers to find somebody on their team to serve as the champion for that particular development team. And here's the problem. The development managers don't always know who to pick. So they may choose someone and say, hey, go join this thing. It's just some training, do this. Or, hey, this person's not busy. You can take care of this. And then occasionally, these folks would show up and they didn't really understand what the program was about. They didn't have the interest. They didn't necessarily have full alignment with what it was, and it wasn't a good match. What works better is really looking for champions that self-select. And a great story that I heard in the course of this research, there was a CISO that did lunch and learn with various developers. And what he and his team did is they rolled back some patches on the applications that they were working on. And then they showed the developers and the people attending the lunch and learn, okay, without those patches, these were the vulnerabilities. Here's how you would have broken the application based on that. So you were basically teaching developers how to attack old versions of the application. And the developers that got excited about this, that went up afterwards, that seemed really jazzed about it, those are the ones that came up as, hey, that's the person we want as a developer security champion. So really looking for people that are interested in self-select versus asking, the manager to pick somebody. That ended up being a really important trend throughout the research.
Yeah, because you want somebody that's interested in the security aspects of the application. Otherwise, they're probably going to get bored going through a bunch of vulnerability patching. Yeah.
They won't show up. Maybe they'll go through the training, but they won't really engage. And it's not going to be successful if you do that. You want people that are interested in it, that are excited about security. And the reality is some of those people, not a lot of them, but a couple may end up moving over to the security side at some point. That's not necessarily the goal, But as you have developers that see this opportunity to advance their careers in some way, get more involved in this, become passionate about it, it's another way of growing more security people too.
Yeah. Now I've got executive buy-in. I've got a
Yep.
budget. I have somebody that's going to run the program in the security team that's going to head it up.
Yep.
And I've got self-selected individuals.
Yes.
What does a training program look like? Let me. I'm going to ask this by kind of prefacing a little bit. Do you start with things like static analysis, software? I mean, what is that kind of progression?
It's interesting. The tooling came up a little bit, and oftentimes it was, were the security champions involved in helping to select the tooling or use the tooling? But it started even further back than that. It was, what do we mean by secure development? What do you have to watch for? What are the questions? More contextual learning and training. And that varied quite a bit. Sometimes it might be training courses. There were a couple of, there was one that they called their security champions Jedis. They had a whole Star Wars theme, and they kicked it off, and they all the leaders of the program showed up dressed up as Star Wars characters, and it was awesome. And they did like a couple of days of training, and the purpose was not only to teach secure development concepts, but also to get the champions to know each other and to start building those relationships and building the relationships with the security team. So it's less about teaching the tooling and more about teaching some of the concepts and the things to look for and establishing the relationships among the team.
So then do you start with basic things like the OWASP top 10 and what's a SQL injection and cross-site scripting? And is that where you kind of start, just to kind of educate them on the types of attacks that are out there that could impact the application and not worry about how you maybe detect them yet or anything like that, but you're just teaching them the basics?
You got to start with the basics.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to get the basics down, and it varies a lot depending on how mature the program is and how large the organization is. Are there different levels of training? All of those things come into play, but start with the basics. Start by explaining, the OWASP top 10. And if you can contextualize that to the particular languages that they're working in and particular problems that the organization may have faced in the past in terms of security, so much the better. But I mean, all of us started with the basics at some point in our career.
Yes, of course. Now, I've got the program going. We're doing the training. How do you start to measure the impact of this new security champion team? Because you got a budget. Somebody at some point is going to say, is this getting us anywhere? So what are some of the ways we measure success of a program like this?
Yeah, so there are two elements of this that I want to cover, Matt. There's the security metrics part of it, and then there's the engagement part. Part of the success that you should be able to measure back early on, and I'll tell you, this was the area that I think most of the program leaders struggled with the most to define, because it can be a little bit difficult to attribute success specifically to a program. Because remember, at the same time you have the program, you've got tooling, you've got other things going on. So put some amount of the measurement in the engagement of the champions. How are they showing up to meetings? How many champions are you training? Are they staying on? Are they getting involved? Are they raising issues? I had one leader that regularly does CSAT surveys internally with their champions and to ask, how's it going? And, anything that we can improve, so that they were getting that feedback in a very real way from the people that they were working with. But then I think you're also asking about the security metrics. And that's where it gets interesting, right? Because bug count is a crappy metric. The first time that you run a scan, you're going to find a boatload of security issues. That's not a sign that you shouldn't have done this work. So you have to look at it as a process. One of my favorite application security metrics is time to fix. I think if you are able to show a decrease in time to fix over a period of time, that's a good sign that issues are being remediated faster and people are learning about how to fix. They're identifying them more quickly, probably running scans more frequently, and identifying things earlier in the life cycle. So I really like time to fix early on as something that can help show a trend in improvement. Over time, certain types of bug counts and vulnerability counts might be interesting. there was somebody I spoke to that looked at types of bugs found. So if SQL injection, flaws keep showing up in scans, then that's a sign that the education in that area isn't working.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So be able to break it down by that as well. But it's definitely a challenge. I think the biggest challenge is to attribute the success of, or of particular metrics to that program as opposed to anything else. So it's a combination of items.
Yeah, I think the other one that I think would be interesting is a decrease in time to fix, but an increase in velocity, right? Because if we think about the developer's goal, it's getting things out faster, right?
Yeah.
So if I can improve velocity, but also bring down my time to fix, or maybe track certain critical bugs, then what I think I end up with is, yes, I'm seeing velocity pick up, I'm seeing time to fix come down, and I'm seeing certain categories of bugs decreasing. Those three kind of categories of metrics are probably a good way to measure success in the program because velocity matters.
You've hit on one of my favorite metrics, which is release speed. And Forrester's own research in asking development managers about how often they release shows that the acceleration of that is continuing to go up. So, in 2018, it was something like 28% of respondents said they released once a month or more frequently. And then in 2019, it jumped up to like high 30s. And this year, it's 41%. So you're seeing more frequent releases. Speed is a huge requirement. The goal is to get features and product in the customer's hands. That's what developers are incented by. That's what they're goaled on. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that comes back to the whole meeting developers where they are, having empathy for what they're dealing with, because that's what's important to them. That's what's going to help them meet their goals and get their bonuses.
Yeah, absolutely. Sandy, is there a place people can go to find the Forrester research, a place to point them?
So at Forrester website on Forrester.com, there is a report called Build a Developer Security Program for those who are Forrester members. But I also put out a blog on the Forrester site. If you search for me on there, and I did write a little bit about some of the key trends in the blog, and anyone can take a look at the blog.
That's awesome. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly.
Thanks very much, Matt. Thanks for having me. Hey, have a great week.
Thanks. You too. And with that, we'll take a short break and come back with more interviews on Virtual Hacker Summer Camp.